Καλησπέρα σας, καλησπέρα σε όλες και όλους. Good evening, everyone. I'll give it another minute for people to set up the screens and stuff. It is a great pleasure to have with us Professor Sari Pietikäinen of the University of Jyväskylä, who is a sociolinguist and discourse scholar whose research focuses on the power of discourse in revaluing natural resources in knowledge production and the politics of language and identity. Using multiple approaches, including assemblage, ontology, nexus analysis, critical discourse analysis, and ethnography, she has tracked shifts in language ideologies and identity categories in peripheries of nation-states in Western Europe, and examined the interaction between material, discursive, and affective dimensions related to Cold Rush, an intensified transformation of the Arctic commons into commodities. In collaboration with stakeholders and colleagues, she has experimented with various knowledge designs such as science postcards, cartoons, art-based conversation pieces, and photo exhibitions to engage various audiences in discussing research findings related to Cold Rush, professional sports as work, and multilingual language practices. She has published widely on these topics, including Assemblage of Art, Discourse, and Ice Hockey, Designing Knowledge About Work, 2002 in Journal of Sociolinguistics, Powered by Assemblage, Language for Multiplicity in 2021, International Journal of the Sociology of Language, as well as in Finnish, Critical Sociolinguistic Research Methods with Monika Heller and Juan Pujolar, Sociolinguistics from Periphery with Ellen Kelly-Holmes, Alexander Jaffe, and Nicholas Scotland. She works as a professor of discourse studies at the University of Jyväskylä and is co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of Sociolinguistics. It's a great honor and a great pleasure, Sari. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me to be part of this very interesting and innovative webinar, and for this very kind introduction. So I'm very happy to be here tonight, and I'm looking forward to our discussion after my talk. So I would like to talk with you today about exploring sociolinguistic dynamics through assemblage thinking. And I will be using Cold Rush research project, and especially hockey part of it, to try to explain and illustrate what assemblage thinking might mean when we are interested in connections between language and society. So my talk today is in three parts, talking first about researching dynamics between language and society, and how it requires rethinking contexts, but also connections. And then talking about power of assemblage, which in essence, to me, or I take it to mean, is a move from singularity to multiplicity and complexity. And giving examples from the Cold Rush research project, where we have examined how Arctic natural resources has been used and turned into the commodities. And also talking about one particular ethnographic case studies in Cold Rush, which focus on professional ice hockey players. Throughout the talk, I try to make explicit the connections with ethnography, and I'm looking forward to have a conversation with you all about possible connections between assemblage thinking and ethnography at the end of this talk. Some of these frameworks might be familiar to you already. I have picked up these two first ones because these have been how I have been trained and what kind of frameworks I have been used in my past researches. So on the left-hand side, you can see Norman Fairclough's famous 3 boxes, where he lays out kind of a theory about how to connect language level, the textual level, into the discursive practices, and then up to the social practices and how to use this, for instance, to analyze media texts or representations. And then the Nexus analytical model in the middle by Ron Scollon and Susie von Scollon, where they combine the different strands of sociolinguistics. So on the one hand, the interactional order, then the discourses circulating in the place, and the historical body, which can mean kind of the ethnography of the stakeholders and actors in a given social action. And then moving on to something that I have been working with the last 10 years, which is Deleuze's and Guattari's ontological framework that makes use of both assemblage and rhizome, which can be seen as a twin concepts or connected concepts, where in this kind of a model, which is a research design for the Coldress project, that we were thinking about that the key sites where we do our ethnographic fieldwork are kind of a hotspots in the Cold Rush. And while kind of this kind of a multi-sited ethnography is maybe familiar to many of us, I personally felt that one of the challenges is how to then link the different findings from the different sites and different hotspots in Cold Rush. And for that purpose, I find assemblage useful concept. But first, talking about the rhizome and kind of zooming into the ontology of rhizomatic thinking. Deleuze and Guattari talk about two different logics of thinking about how the world is constructed and how world come into a being, and present that we have a rhizome structure and a three structure. And rhizome structure is and kind of a structure, whereas the three structure is either or, kind of a make it the kind of a dichotomies where you have to choose. And they make an argument that in a Western research tradition, we tend to go to the hierarchical tree structure, while the messy everyday life often is more organized with the rhizome model. And they make an argument that rather than kind of a force to be choose either or, we can think that sometimes it makes sense to work with the three logic, and sometimes it makes more sense to work with a rhizomatic structure. And I suggest that especially when working with multi-sited ethnography, this kind of a rhizomatic thinking is helpful in trying to make the links, the continuities, the relationships between the actors and the concepts and the field sites more visible, and help to make both the results but also the theoretical claims. So you can kind of think that both the rhizome and tree are in a dialogue, that they are connected through the rhizomatic organization, and the multi-sited ethnography can be seen as a different spots in the tree, and the rhizomatic is the hand of the researcher or the thinking of the researcher that tries to make the connections between the different findings or different field sites or between different concepts. So moving on to Cold Rush, and this picture takes us to the Finnish Arctic, and this kind of a visuality that is often how Arctic is depicted, kind of a frontier, empty vast land where there is not much kind of a human touches or culture or infrastructure, but kind of a untouched nature, resources that are waiting there to be utilized. I'm not sure how closely you can see this picture, but if you kind of try to zoom at the bottom of the picture, you will actually see that there are some lights and the different infrastructure indicating that actually behind this hill there is a huge international skiing resort. And behind the other mountain, there is one of the biggest gold mine in the Europe. So even it looks like untouched and pristine and pure, it is invested a lot of transformation of Arctic natural resources into the commodities. Here you can see a picture of one of the busiest airports in Finland. Of course, the capital airport is the busiest one, but this is the second busiest one, which is the main airport in the Lapland, in the Arctic, in the Finnish Arctic. And we happened to do the cold rush research project during the time that pandemic came. And you can see the huge difference between the Christmas holiday season in 2019 and then the year after, when the same airport was totally deserted and nobody was traveling. And in the cold rush, we were interested in particular to find out how small companies, family companies, individuals, but also municipalities cope with this unpredictable economic rush, but also the boom and bust that are very kind of a typical when we're thinking about two main resource for income in the Arctic, mining and tourism. They both can be characterized as having a cycle of boom and bust that makes the investments always risky, not only to the environment, but also to the investors and to the municipalities. And this is what we wanted to get a hold of in Cold Rush Research Project. We were interested to see that when the value of the natural resources changes, also the categories that are important for social structure change as well. So if we're thinking about, for instance, water, that is something that is plentiful in the Finnish Arctic and is considered most of the cases as a common, so free for use for anyone. But in the recent years, it has been started to put hold on companies as a private property and turn into the commodities. And then the relationship between the raw water resource and the people and the value change. So do the categories as well. So who can be the owner of the water or beneficiary of the profit from the water? What we see now happening in the Arctic is the commodification of the air. So allegedly, the air in the Arctic is one of the cleanest air in the Europe. And different companies, tourist companies, are trying to make a claim how to make this make profit out of the cleanest air and the night vision that it brings along. And when these relationships change, it disturbs the existing politics and existing identity categories. And this is something that we need to account for, this kind of a complex multiplicities when people can be simultaneously stakeholders or beneficiaries, or they can be marginalized from the economic profit making, or they can be both local but still outsiders. They can have a say in a decision making, or they can be voted out for that. So how to account for this kind of a complex multiplicities that come along when natural resources are revalued. In the Cold Rush project, we wanted to examine more closely this intensified race for the Arctic natural resources and this transformation from commons to the commodities. We use critical ethnography and discourse analysis to examine these transformations. And we focus particularly that kind of economic hotspots that were expanding. And these were, in our case, mining and tourism in particular. So two big industries in the area. We focus on work and workers, because as you might know, Finnish Arctic is sparsely populated. So when there is tourist season, there is always a question where you get bodies to do the work, but also with the mining, where there's a lot of mining happening, where do you get the bodies to do the mining work? And this is also where the language figures in, that how do you work, in which languages you can work, what kind of a genres people know, how to take care of the risks and the safety of the work. And then the temporality of the rush that inevitably brings the cycle of boom and bust. And then trying to weave together these different transformations and these different kinds of fieldwork sites that we worked, we use the concept of assemblage. So we have seen, and we are seeing, a lot of work that use multi-trans, inter, etc. kind of indexes to show the different kinds of perspectives that the studies are bringing together. I think that assemblage goes beyond multi-trans, inter, by type of a research, in that it tries to bring together material, discursive, and affective dimensions of the object that we are studying. So if we think about the language, for instance, it is not from an assemblage point of view, language doesn't work alone, but it works together with the material and affective aspects. And here you might hear the links with the post-humanists, new materialists perspectives. So let's dive in a little bit more closer to the concept of assemblage. So this concept was introduced by Deleuze and Guattari, who are contemporary French philosophers to Foucault. And like Foucault, they too were interested in how a change in society happens and how that is interlinked with power relationships, and how can we bring along a change, or that kind of a change that we wish to have. Deleuze and Guattari argue that assemblage is a multi-temporal, heterogeneous arrangement of various kinds of stuff. They may be discourses, they might be different materialities, objects, ideas, ideologies, but it also involves bodies, and it always involves also affects. And as if this was not enough, they then also argued that it always needs to have a desire, that the desire is the fuel, the engine behind the assemblage. And they also connect the assemblage with the capitalist transformations. So when thinking about the cold rush, that we were interested in how Arctic natural resources are transformed into the commodities, we find, or I find, that the assemblage is a productive term to try to think with what kind of arrangements are needed to produce those transformations. Deleuze and Guattari suggest also that assemblage refers both to the act of assemblaging different elements for a particular assemblage, but also the act of arranging them in a specific way. So assemblage always has a function. So I can give an example of superberry. So that is something that has been produced in the Arctic. So mundane wild berries have been produced through discourse and different kind of material elements into the superberries to the global health markets. And to have that shift from a mundane blueberry to the superberry, you need to assemblage different kinds of discourses. You need to different materialities and affects in order that assemblage starts to function as a superberry. And they also argue that there needs to happen a productive interaction between the different elements so that the assemblage becomes more than the sum of its parts. And they give an example of a horse, an arrow, and the rider. So for these elements to become a weapon, they need to interact together, the rider, the horse, and the arrow, or the bow. This is what we have kind of taken up when we studied a 4-year ethnography with the professional ice hockey players. Ice hockey is the most popular sports in Finland, and globally Finland is among the best hockey nations, together with Canada and Sweden. And we followed and did ethnography with one particular team that has international players in circulation. So there would be players from Canada, from Switzerland, from Sweden, from Russia, who came to play in this team. And vice versa, the local players, the Finnish players, sometimes went to abroad to play in other teams. And we wanted to understand how a successful ice hockey team works under these kind of a changing conditions. And we worked with this one team, its players, the volunteers, the coaches, the owners, the sponsors, and also with the fan and the media discourse. So you can think about the assemblage here, that how it started to help us to make sense of these different key participants that we were having, and the ethnographic knowledge that we started to accumulate, and to be able to relate them to each other. So our focus was hockey as a work, and soon we realized that part of that ethnography also needs to be hockey, the invisible work that is embedded in ice hockey or any kind of a team sports. So the work by the volunteers and the parents and the fans who, like here you can see in this picture, they are doing, they sell coffee and snacks during the breaks and before the games. And by doing that voluntary work, they earn money for the team. At the same time, hockey as a work involves a highly professional players, but also scouts, coaches, and sports director. And we were interested to see how these different elements, these different expertises, different bodies, different materialities, affects, and desires work together so that it would become a successful team. Here you can also see the different work that happens behind the scenes. So to sharpen the blades of the skates is actually really high-skilled work, or mending the different kinds of gears that happens during the game or just before the game. So there was a lot of invisible work happening even when the games were on ice. And assemblage helped us to try to think together how the materiality of ice hockey, the bodies, the skates, the ice rinks, the economic investments, and the discursive aspect, the pep talks, the feedback of the game nights, the game strategy, the fans cheering for their team, or the media discourses about the success or lack of it concerning the team. And then the affective aspects, the desire to win, to succeed, how to handle the disappointments and the lost games, how to manage the constant change in the hockey assemblage when some of the players were sold to another team and new players came to the team. After working 4 years with the team, the team members and the key participants started to kind of ask, like, so what is the results, and maybe we can wrap this up now, and what are the main findings of this ethnography? And in my mind, I thought that we would talk about the international mobility, the challenges that it brings to the professional players, maybe talk about the multilingualism and the identity issues when people are settling into the new teams or with the new teammates, or how do they communicate when the captain, for instance, speaks only French and nobody in the team speaks French. So how do you communicate in this way? So in my mind, I thought that we would play maybe the strengths of the languages that they were in the team, and we would work on that. But this was not what the key participants in the team were interested in, but they rather wanted to show all the work and investment, including that invisible work, to the world, to the audience, to the fans, and to the community around the team. And this is where we started to use arts and design as a part of finding the articulation of the hockey assemblage. So we collected together professional photographer, designer, cultural anthropologist, myself, and then the key participants from the team. And we designed what we called conversation pieces that articulated the key findings of that 4-year ethnography. And here you can see how it was displayed in the sports faculty of my university. And we also made a virtual exhibition of it. And you can see the kind of an imaginary team called Thunder that we kind of imagined and materialized visually to be able to talk about the research finding of this project. Here you can see some of the conversation pieces that we designed. Here you can see an imaginary note of 100 Finnish marks, where a hockey player is looking for a pond and the Thunder is striking, making the link to the team that is called the Thunder. And then here you can see 2 examples of the skill pins and spirit patches that were designed around the key hockey skills that came out from the ethnography. So like the skating skills or the will to win. And if you want to take a closer look about this, about this exhibition, you can visit it here in the Art of Hockey, where there is a short documentary how we designed it and how we worked with the art and design process. And you can also see these conversation pieces. We also crafted small stories around them that capture some of the main findings, but in a form of narrative. When doing this ethnography about professional ice hockey players and then articulating the main findings with the help of art exhibitions and designed conversation pieces, I think that the concept of assemblage and its impact materialized. Assemblage helped us to see the connections between different elements of the hockey team and the productive forces that come together when different material, discursive, and affective aspects come together. And in terms of the exhibition and the And the conversation pieces, it created critical and creative space to engage with the findings of the research project, but also engaging with the hockey players and their fans to discuss what it means to be or desire to be a professional hockey player or be a fan that wants to follow the hockey. So it opened up the space to discuss about the meaning of professional hockey. So zooming back to the, so we kind of visited one of the case study of the cold rush, which was around the ice hockey, where we used assemblage, especially in articulation of the research findings with the help of arts and design. When kind of trying to summarize the use of assemblage in examining the relationship between language and society, in particular in context of commodification of Arctic natural resources, I can kind of highlight three impacts that comes along with Arctic, with assemblage thinking. One is that there is no single story. The second one is that it is worthwhile to look interaction between material, discursive, and affective, and what do they produce together. And also keep a critical eye on the politics of selection and organization. So let's dive in a little bit more closer to each of these impacts. So the impact are that there is never a single story. So when studying something that is complex, ongoing process, we usually do end up counting for complexities, juxtapositions, paradoxes, and contradictions. Like one depicted here, where you can see a picture. In the picture, you can see the pit of a mine, and then reindeers resting on the front of the pit mine. So kind of a juxtaposition between traditional livelihood and with the industrial livelihood occupying the same space. And assemblage allows us or reminds us to think about the multiple stories, not only single story, not only single answer or single solution. And I think this is helpful when we are examining these kind of overlapping processes and practices. The impact too is that the usefulness to try to think about what material, discursive, and affective dimensions of the object our study produces together. That it is not only a language, or it's not only the materiality that brings along the function of the assemblage or what is happening there in the world with the object that we are studying, but together the material, discursive, and affective aspects. Often this also brings along the interaction between past, present, and future. And in our case, this was really evident when discussing about mining industry in the region. The region, the Arctic region, has several hundred years long history in mining. And for many inhabitants, mining was something that brought along progress and infrastructure and secured jobs, even though they did, of course, recognize the risks that it poses to the environment. But it also brought along this kind of a power of nostalgia that since the mining did work well in the 60s or in the 30s, why wouldn't they work now as well? So using the nostalgia and the memory and the affect that they bring along as a discourse infrastructure to justify and to argue why mining should be kept open or why new mines should be opened in the area. And then the impact 3 that calls upon our attention to how the different elements to assemblage are selected and how they are organized. So for instance, are they more hierarchical, tree type of organization, or are they more like a rhizomatic, connected to different kinds of other hotspots? in this picture, it might look just that there is forest and white ground near on both sides, but actually on the right-hand side, the white stripe is a river, which is a protected river because the wild salmon still lives in that. And on the left-hand side, it is actually a mining pit that has been covered first by water and then by snow. And it's only that very narrow patch of land that separates the wild river and the mining pit water. And this kind of gives an example of maybe the dominant ideology concerning the land use in the Arctic, that it is so vast country, so vast area, that there is room for everyone to exist in parallel or in harmony. And this then is contested by environmental activists, but also indigenous Sami people whose traditional lands these belong. So actually it might look a frontier, or it is treated like a frontier by international investors, and it's treated like a state land by the nation state of Finland, but it is also indigenous land for the indigenous Sami people. So that's why I think the assemblage reminds us also to keep eye on how this selection and organization of resources are happened and what kind of a logic is used. So trying to sum up the power of assemblage, or its usefulness, or when it might be useful when doing ethnographic work, and when we are interested in the relationship between language and society. Well, I think that one of the great aspects of it is that it works against totality and against binaries. So this is against the tree type of an organization of our thinking. So it is not that much interested in essence, what something is, but rather it calls upon our attention to how things function and work. So it calls upon our interest, or focuses our interest on processes, and also relationship between, let's say here, between the traditional reindeer herding livelihoods and the industrial mining industry. So rather than saying that either the reindeers or the mining, but try to look at what kind of a relationship there is, how they can occupy the same space. What is the history behind it? What are the material conditions that this is happening, and how they function together, and who are the allies and enemies for this kind of a assemblage. Assemblage thinking also has a very close connection with ethnography, in that sense that it always claims that there is no universal claims to be made, but everything that we count for is situated. So we can gain information and knowledge and understanding about particular events and particular histories and particular desires that happen under particular conditions. And then it also calls upon our attention to relationships. So rather than the essences of a particular, let's say, field site, it invites us to think about the connections between different field sites, or between different movements, or between different processes. And I find that this is really interesting and helpful with multi-sited ethnography, that it allows, it kind of gives a horizon against which you can kind of mirror or connect the findings of the various field sites. Assemblage is emergent. It is a process of becoming, and in that sense, again, I think it links well with the ethnography, in that sense that I think both try to capture the unfolding of events or processes, or how people make sense of the world around them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a really engaging talk. Before I give the floor to our audience for questions, I would like to ask you whether you see assemblage thinking as well as rhizomatic considerations as a good, how should I say, accompaniment to superdiversity, which has been so much talked about over the last decade.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I have to say that I haven't really thought about it. I guess I'm not that familiar with the superdiversity, at least not with the recent developments, but I guess they are quite different. So to my understanding, the superdiversity kind of adds on a layer of the intensity, how things are happening, rather than maybe assemblage thinking tries to capture the different dimensions, the material and affective and discursive, and how they work together. So in that sense, I think they are quite different.
All right. And how would you, what would you say are the main strands, the discourses about the things you talked about in the assemblages of art and work, in the Arctic, in the context of the gold rush? What, I mean, if you were asked to pinpoint discourses, emblematic discourses, what would they be about?
So in the Arctic, the two emblematic discourses are quite contradictory to each other. So the other one is the environmental discourse about climate change and the ecological change that is happening, and an urge to a rapid climate and environmental actions. Mm-hmm. And the other one it comes from a history of from the periphery of the nation state, that things are far more sparse in Lapland, and therefore we need to engage with any kind of a means that we can in order to keep the schools running and the health centers open and the snow clear out from the roads. And I think there is this temporality, that the environmental discourse is about now and the future, and the kind of economic, how to make the living now, emphasize the temporality of the past and the present.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or remarks from our audience? Our audience can have the floor to address questions to our speaker. Marianthi, kalispera. Good evening. Kalispera, Marianthi.
Yes, thank you so very much. That was really very, very, very interesting. Although I have some questions concerning the difference between rhizome and assemblage. I am familiar with the use of rhizome by Deleuze and Guattari, and I guess assemblage is also used by them.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm not very sure I got the difference. That's one question. And the other is, okay, you look at all these different parameters, aspects of the phenomena, material, immaterial, discourse, etc. And what do you do with them? I mean, what's the upshot of this? I mean, do you reach any kind of conclusion? Or you just assemble these things and you say that they actually interact with each other? Can you decide the degree of the impact they have? or whatever. I mean, what's the conclusion of that? I mean, what is the actual analysis of all these things? Because in ethnography or in conversational analysis, for instance, or in sociolinguistic in general, we reach some kind of conclusion, okay? So I was wondering, what do you do all these elements, which are very, very interesting, of course. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant questions, and right to the sore points as well. So let me start with the rhizome assemblage, and maybe a side note that Deleuze and Guattari are famous of writing in a soft way, in a sense that things and concepts do overlap intentionally. So rhizome and assemblage are kind of like cousins or sisters, if you wish, that they do overlap and they are in contact to each other. But if we want to kind of try to articulate what is the difference between them. So in my understanding, the difference is that rhizome tries to describe an alternative ways of organizing things against the tree, the hierarchical organization. So rhizome, like how things are connected. They are borrowing this from the brain research. The brain is a rhizome and works like a rhizome. Or we can think about some of the vegetables or flowers that work through rhizomes. So they want to kind of not say that one is better than the other, but that these kind of different ways of organizing is worthwhile of looking when it works like a tree or the hierarchical structure, and when actually this kind of a rhizomatic connections to each other works better. And in my case, assemblage, the rhizome worked better with the Arctic cold rush, because we had different sites and different processes that we needed to connect together, and they are not in a hierarchical structure, but they are connected to each other. So I hope that makes a minimal sense. And then assemblage, you can think about that there are these rhizomes, these connections, and sometimes these connections kind of come together so that there are very busy kind of nodes. And these nodes can be looked as assemblages. What elements are brought together to make a successful hockey team or a superberry, for instance? So what elements are brought together to have particular kind of a function? And then going to what to do about these kind of the findings or the conclusions. In concerning the hockey, I think we were able to articulate the different elements that also include counting the affects and discourses to make a successful team. Of course, we don't have a recipe so that we would know that they will always be successful, but that it needs to be taken account these all elements. And we were able through the ethnography to show that in a different game nights what were happening and what elements were brought together, that how the work looks in terms of affective work and discursive work, and then the material work, and how they are related to each other. And I think that was helpful for the team and interesting for the researchers to see the different parts of the work of a professional hockey player or any professional hockey work, professional athlete.
Practical aspects of your work, which is very useful. I mean, you could apply this to the team, make them aware of what each of these things actually, how they work towards their success or failure. Okay, yes. That's useful. But I was thinking ethnography does not work on binaries either. So as you said yourself, this is ethnography, in fact, isn't it? I mean, with a difference a little bit, but it's ethnography. I mean, that's how it works anyway. Okay.
Yeah. At least it can be applied. So
that's cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of connections.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianti. Any more questions from our audience or comments?
No, I'm very fond of Finnish cinema.
Yes, Kaurismäki is now on.
Maki is one of my favorites. Just to let you know.
Yeah, so in Kaurismäki cinema, I think one of the elements in their assemblage is silence.
You're right. You're right. Yeah.
Isolda, hello Isolda. Isolda, all the way from Argentina. We have Isolda Carranza. Hello Isolda, you have the floor.
Hello, Costas. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
I am in a country where these two philosophers have had years of very strong influence on literary writers and literary critics and students of literature. But now that I see their ideas applied in linguistic ethnography, I'm really curious to know how such a theoretical framework would deal with conflict. Because along the presentation, I have not seen cases in which the different interests of the tourist industry, the mining industry, and environmentalists clash. And even within the team, competition between ice hockey teams, if we could transfer that to any other sports, competition is likely to derive into clashes, even violent clashes. So what do you do with conflict?
Really great question. I guess in my reading, there is by no means that kind of a stance that the conflict or contestations or tensions would not be included in assemblage if it comes along. And as you might well know, they also develop the schizoanalysis to try to articulate the different tensions and paradoxes and kind of on the surface really irrational elements that also happens in interactions. In my mind, I think that they use the line of flight as a way of autonomadic assemblage to articulate the kind of interactions or assemblage that function in a way that they want to escape or change or be revolutionary to the more dominant, let's say, state assemblage or capitalist assemblage. So I guess in my answer would be that they would look at the relationship between different assemblages that have different functions. So you could look at the radical assemblage or the conflict assemblage or the revolutionary assemblage, what elements that brings together brings together in order to have that function, in order to revolutionize or to change or to be radical or to be critical.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Isolda. Thank you, Sari. Thank you for an interesting question and very good answer. I think we have time for another question, for a final question from our audience. If there are no further questions, I would like to extend a very, very warm thank you for your time and effort, Sari, and for sharing this engaging work with us. Hoping that I will have a chance of meeting you in person quite soon.
I hope to meet you all in person as well, and thank you so much for taking part and for this great questions. They stirred my curiosity, and I made lots of notes, and I will keep on thinking about them and hope to kind of get a better handle of them. So thank you for having me, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you all. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Have a good night. Next week, we're going to be here again with Jelena Filipovic from Belgrade, who's going to be talking about language and gender in Serbia in the context of female entrepreneurship. So we have a date next week at 9. Thank you very much again, Sari. It was great meeting you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Καληνύχτα.
Ευχαριστώ.
Costa, keep it short, please. You know, we are so tired, it's so late, and we're so tired. Short and straight, okay?
Greetings to Isolde, especially greetings
Yeah,
to
okay, right.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Bye.